Well, good afternoon, folks. It would be rude to start properly before the countdown is finished, but there we go. It's really great to see you. This is Discipleship Practices of the Northern Saints. Just to check you're in the right space, and so am I. And if you wanted to pick a soundtrack to introduce Discipleship Practices of the Northern Saints, you couldn't do any better than what we just had. It was as if, St. Chad was on the saxophone and Cuthbert was on the drums and so on. So it's probably one of the more upbeat introductions I've had to a seminar on discipleship, but that's a good thing. So it's lovely to have a little space with you now. And when John said to me about the development day and said, well, is there anything you'd like to offer in terms of seminars? I said, well, we should do something as we did before lunch on new worshiping communities. And it was great to hear examples across Sheffield of people starting new things and trying new things, this renewal of church planting that we were talking about earlier on in the day. But the other thing that I thought it would be interesting to reflect on you with is what we learn about that renewal of prayer and discipleship, which is also a matter of refreshing our roots in the Christian tradition, constantly refreshing our roots in the story of God and of God's people and the resources that are there for us. And for me, it's been a real eye-opener to work with a few people on this. So we have a little team of historians that we've been working with. So Professor D. Dias, who was the lead of the Centre for Christianity and Culture at York University, Michelle Brown, Professor Michelle Brown, who was for a time the curator of the Lindisfarne Gospels down at the British Museum, and now happily moved up to the Northern Province. And a few others as well, some advisors, Joyce Hill and others who are on our Faith of the North website. And the more we connected with the story of the Northern Saints, and I'm going to take saints in the broader definition of the early Northern Christians in that 7th and 8th century period, just the more fascinating we found it as a source for discipleship. So what I'd love to do with you is just share just a little something, one particular nugget or insight that I found particularly interesting, and then really to ask you a question and see if you've got a story that connects, and then we'll take some feedback and things using the roving mics, and hopefully I can jump off that with sharing just one way of looking at the discipleship practices of the Northern Saints. There's lots of ways of doing it. You could take them saint by saint. I'm not going to do that, but you could. I don't know, you could take them area by area. But what I wanted to do was if we go to the next slide, there we go. So I've talked about this already, renewal of prayer, renewal of storytelling, renewal of church planting, and how those belong together. So renewal of prayer and discipleship in its wider aspect, I guess I'm saying here. And then if you go on to the next one, the thing that struck me when we think about discipleship practices of the early Northern Christians is how physical they were. That's the thing that really struck me. They were what you might call material practices. They were to do with the material stuff of life. And it's interesting that some of the things that we hold on to from that period are material things. I think the cross there is at Ian, just over in Derbyshire. The cross it's such a physical thing. You have to carve it and erect it, and then it's just there. And we have these Anglo-Saxon crosses, and there's such a physically imposing thing that you connect with. The poles you can see, I don't know if you recognise the walk to Lindisfarne. Yeah. And I hadn't done this until a couple of years ago, and I went online, and it was, you are crossing the Lindisfarne causeway, exercise extreme care. And so the first time I went, I was a bit scared. I was like, I wonder what's going to happen. And I was cutting the time a bit tight, because I always do. And I thought, I hope I don't get washed away. and then you actually turn up and there's these poles that take you all the way across. And it's just a very physical thing to do, to go, to walk out to that island. And of course, the Lindisfarne Gospels themselves. I don't want to be, to talk in too much of a broad brush, but it struck me that when I first thought about discipleship, I thought about it conceptually, as a set of ideas or kind of spiritual themes. Crucial things, I guess, things like repentance, things like being filled with the Spirit, things like knowing the truth. But I tended to think of discipleship as a set of ideas that you become convinced about. And I think what really struck me was how discipleship in this period seems to have really taken root as something that you do. And probably something that you hold or see or walk towards or stand in front of. I thought, that's really interesting. And I think that might be one of the gifts of the early northern disciples to us, is to value the physical. That the physical has this incredible capacity to, now, I'll just throw in a tiny theological thought if you don't mind, but we could talk about it being able to carry the presence of God. And the theologian that I studied called von Balthasar, he talked about things being capax Dei, which means they have the capacity for God. Capax Dei. And if you think that's a crazy thought for Christians, you might just think about the bread and the wine, or actually the physical body of Jesus Christ. If you believe that in him all the fullness of God dwelt in bodily form, that's Colossians chapter 1, is it? Chapter 2, early Colossians. If you think that in the physical body of Christ, in him all the fullness of God dwelt in bodily form, then you believe that physical matter is capax Dei, it's capable of bearing God. This is the great argument that the early theologian Irenaeus used against the Gnostics, who said, well, if you want to get to God, you've got to get away from physical things. And Irenaeus said, no. When God became one of us, he took on flesh and showed that physical things can carry God. And so we have this notion of them being holy. So we talk about Holy Communion and the Holy Scriptures, and Holy Island, and so on. So that's my little thought. And I wanted to show you one other thing, and then I'm going to get you to do some thinking. So when I thought about it, I took my kind of conceptualizing brain and thought, okay, this is the way I've been taught to think of discipleship in boxes. So I'm going to, hard to shake that. So I've got my brain that splits things into boxes. So let's have 6 boxes. But I'm going to apply it to these practices. I've thought about them in terms of these 6 symbols that you've got here, 6 things which are kind of material practices of one kind or another. And the question I'm going to ask you is, how have you engaged with one of these as a physical practice of discipleship? Something that involved you going or stepping or holding or carrying or something like that. So they are reading across. So the cross. The cross, how have you engaged with the cross or the act of making the sign of the cross? Has that been important to you in discipleship? I'd be interested to hear a story about that if we can. And we'll see if we can go around all 6. We'll have to move promptly and if I say something about each one. Secondly, the word. The word, we have really, when I was talking about this, we talked about there's been great gains by having Bibles on our phones, but there have been losses as well of losing the physical act of having the Holy Scriptures. Has that ever been important to you? Has that ever been really important, the having, carrying, holding, using a Bible physically like that? Maybe it still is. That third image is a road, the way. So going, walking out, going on that journey of faith, going on the journey of mission and the journey of pilgrimage. So the cross, the word, the way, the light, the towel and the table. The light is prayer. I needed a physical symbol for prayer. I've gone for light. We could have had the light of a candle as here, or we could have had the kind of light as it dawns, each morning. And we think of engagement with the physical creation in prayer. So the cross, the word, the way, the light, the towel. That is a towel. So this was service. The physical act of serving and being served. And the table, gathering round the table, by which principally we mean the holy table, but also, the practice of eating together. So that's my question to you, is think of those 6 things as physical practices. Is there one of those you can think of an example where it's been really important to you in growing as a disciple? You felt the life of God in it, and it's helped you grow closer to Jesus. And then we'll just take some examples of these, and I will riff off the example. Oh, there we go. That's great. So the cross, the word, the way, the light, the towel, the table. Which of these material things or practices has meant a great deal to your faith? Is that okay as a question? So just 5 minutes to share that where you are in 2s and 3s, and then we will weave that into the second part of this session.
St Francis now, and I'm a tertiary Franciscan, and that's why I had to leave to renew my vows this morning. And I went on retreat to Glasshampton while I was on sabbatical, which is Franciscan house.
So
It is quite physical.
this is the bit that I can't account for because I have no idea whether you've actually done what I asked, which you may not have, or whether we've got all of the 6 symbols covered, which we may not. But I think we have a roving mic. Oh, good, look at that, 2 roving mics. So we're doubly equipped to. Has anybody got? Well, who would like to kick us off with an example, and then we'll see how we do. So could somebody just share very briefly an example of where one of these physical things or practices has really made a difference? Okay, over at the front here. Super. We'll just start with one. We'll just have a quick example, then we'll move around.
Yeah, so I started with the way. When I'm struggling, my thing tends to be I go and find somewhere to walk, either through the woods, seeing God's creation, being among it. I might go swimming or just jump in my car and jump on the motorway and drive with Jesus music playing. That's something I use.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I have a little deal with God actually, which is that during the summer months, I'm allowed to I do my exercise before I do my prayers, just because I just find mentally it just puts me in a better space. In the winter months, there's no point, so I might as well just go and pray. But yeah, the physical act of being on the way. Okay, has someone got a different one? So we're going to see if we can do all 6, but let's see, one at the back.
For me, it's the towel.
Yes.
I'm one of the chaplains at St Luke's Hospice, so it's about journeying with people in their journey of faith and spirituality. I'm not leading, I'm not pushing them, we're just walking side by side. It's my journey and their journey. They're inputting into my faithful journey. I hopefully am helping them into their faithful journey.
Yeah. It's the importance of the towel. There's a thing on Substack actually, which hosts web blogs, which is an existential guide to friendship, which isn't the best name for a Substack. But it's really powerful the way it just talks about. It says if you want to make friends, you've got to. I was going to find it. It says basically you've got to. If you want to make friends, you've got to find something to push against. You've got to find something practical to do. She says it's got to be something that. So it is called an existential guide to making friends. And I wonder if I can find the thing. It says, the number one tip for making friends is go where hands do things. Put your body where objects resist you. Clay classes, community gardens, picket lines, choir practice, soup kitchens, a Dungeons and Dragon table. Anywhere where the third thing, soil, song, soup, dice, can stand between you and the other person, like a kindly chaperone. So to have something to do allows us to build friendships, connections across which faith and love can flow. It's a great example. Great. Has everyone got a different one? We've had two. I wonder how we can do. Helen. Oh, well, no, I'll follow the mic. It's fine.
For me, it's the cross. So probably many of us wear a cross and chain, but these last few months, it's been a real symbol of taking up the things that I really struggle with every day, whether that's personally or for work, and just knowing that that's part of my faithfulness to Jesus.
Thank you. I've said to my wife, I said, if we keep going with this Faith in the North thing to 2027's anniversary, I thought I might get a tattoo. Didn't go down well, but like to, the physical, because the cross can be an idea to us, but when the cross becomes a thing, it can be part of what we daily carry. That's so helpful. So that's three. Have we got another one?
Table.
Yeah.
So when that word came out, I was thinking of, we had an agape meal on Maundy Thursday, where we said some prayers, simple prayers, and then we just ate together, and random things, bread and cheese and grapes and whatever people brought, simple food, but and it was just that kind of remembrance of eating together with friends on that particular day as well, that physical act of eating. And a lot of our things in church are around eating, not just communion, but we have Bible breakfast group as well, which is around having some breakfast and Bible reading. So I think it really works to kind of connect people.
It's so true. It's so true. I've only just drunk coffee for the last 3 years, by which I don't mean I've spent the last 3 years just drinking coffee. What I mean is most of my life I never drank coffee. And what I realised was, to my shame in my mid to late 40s, like I deprived people of the opportunity to give me something, and for me to trust what they gave me. So I actually cut off a bit of the human relation of giving and receiving, and the conviviality that happens around a meal. So important with Bible study, with growing church fellowship. So we're doing really well now. What have we not? Has anyone got one to add?
Mine was the word and how important it is, but it's really important for me that it is a physical Bible, that I can hold the weight of the word, that I know where things are and how they have relation to it. But as I'm working with the word, I journal and I draw, and so those words become pictures. But it's in the drawing and the colouring that I find that God speaks to me and brings those words alive in a way that they wouldn't without that physical interaction.
That's so helpful. It's said that when they developed the Lindisfarne Gospels, they invented the light box. Now, I don't really know what a light box is, but it sounds great. But like they developed new technology for printing and for calligraphy, as part of their faith. So this physical act of creativity. I love the way you've linked that with the physical act of reading the scriptures. Did anyone go for the light? Oh, here we go. And AC, can you finish the puzzle for us?
Thank you. I was born and bred in a Roman Catholic family. And my mom was a nun before she got married, so we always had the image of the Virgin Mary and a light. And when the neighbors, the practice was every week the neighbors would bring an image of Virgin Mary and pray the rosary. So the eldest child of the family would lit the candle and it starts with the rosary, with the Lord's Prayer. So for me, light is, I can't do any prayer without lighting a candle. That takes me back to those days.
Yeah. That's lovely. I love that. So I did this on a hunch that in a room of this size, that there would be one of each at least. So I'm encouraged. And I think that's the thing that struck me. I thought, well, if we're going to do discipleship practices, we can go back to the Northern Saints. It's not quite my style to do that, because I don't know quite what to make of some of the stories of the saints, to be really frank with you. There's some quite crazy things that happened in that period, and I'm not in a position really to judge. And I'm a little bit nervous about setting up particular heroic models of this or that. But it does seem to me that one of the things that's really lasted is quite literally, the walk to Lindisfarne, the stone crosses. They are literally still with us. So I just offer it as a different angle on reclaiming our heritage as Northern disciples. And it makes me want to ask you, perhaps to go away and ponder, what are in our churches, how do we give people the physical practices that they need to grow in faith? What are the physical practices your church has and does that really help people grow in faith? And I hadn't thought about it, but I do love this. Put your body where objects resist you, from that blog on friendship. Where is your church putting itself where the objects resist you? The soil, the soup, the song, the dice in a game, it says. How are you putting your faith physically into action so that it becomes a bridging point with those who join in the action, so it becomes a growth point for you personally and physically, so that you enact your faith with your body and not just with your mind? I think that's something quite special about the Anglican Church, is the Anglican Church does believe that that objects can be holy. We believe in consecrated spaces. We're in one now. And yet we also believe that holiness doesn't have to be kind of sort of always jealously guarded, but it kind of flows out into life in new ways. And there's a bit of creativity about the Anglican tradition as well. So what I will do is just make a couple of observations, just to throw out a few more things. I'm drawing off a sermon series that I was able to do just a year ago. And it's a book idea we've been kicking around, but I don't know whether it will see the light of day. But if it doesn't, then it'll have an outing here. So I'll just throw some thoughts your way at each of the 6, and then if we have any time, just take any final comments and questions. So if we go to the next slide, just the thought about the cross. I think the thing that struck me about the cross, when I looked a little bit into the way that the early Northern disciples engaged with it, was how important it was that it recognized suffering. Why do I say that? Because D. Dias, one of these historical advisors, was so clear that Anglo-Saxon life was so short and so risky. And I think they saw in the cross an acceptance of the risk and cost of life. And one bit of evidence for that is something called the Dream of the Rood, which you may know, which is a song. But it's a song. Nowadays, we sing, if we were singing them, we sing songs about the cross. But the Dream of the Rood was a song sung by the cross. I mean, you just wouldn't get it nowadays. I think it's fascinating. Like, the cross sings a song. And one of the things the cross sings is how painful it was when the nails were driven in. And there's a sense of sharing in the sufferings of Christ. And that's part of the song of discipleship. I think it mattered to people that the cross recognized suffering and yet still offered hope. But the other beautiful thing I want to say about the cross is the way it embraced everything. And my evidence for this is slightly indicated on the screen, is that when they would erect one of these crosses, they wouldn't have it as a kind of stark, empty Protestant cross. And they wouldn't either have it as a kind of, really kind of profound, mournful, as it were, if you excuse the simplification, but Catholic cross with, just Jesus. What they would do is they would like draw animals on it, and leaves, and like checkerboards, and labyrinths, and intricate interweaving patterns. The cross somehow brought everything together. I have the dubious privilege tomorrow of having to preach the passage that Bishop Pete preached this morning. So I'm already prepared. I can't change it. The typed notes have been sent to the Farsi congregation. Like we're locked in. And I'm watching Pete preach and thinking, oh, he's a good preacher, isn't he? Look at what he's doing there. And then, so I'm going in a slightly different direction. But is it's the Greek is anaikephaliosastai, to gather up all things. The mysterious plan of God, and Pete alluded to it, is to gather up all things in Christ. All things. This big secret that he alluded to earlier. And so somehow the cross, they saw it as the gathering of all things. And so if God is going to save the world, then on that cross we will draw animals, we will draw patterns, we will draw checkerboards. I just thought, what a fascinating thing about what they believed the scope of redemption was. Let's touch base on a few of this while we have time. So the next one, the word. They valued the word so highly, and we see that in their translation. I think the thing that struck me is, and Michelle Brown draws this out, having been the curator of the Lindisfarne Gospels, she wrote a book called, just after that, it came out a couple of years ago, called Bede and the Theory of Everything. She's brilliant at grabbing a headline, is Michelle Brown, and she sort of latched on to this modern interest in the theory of everything. You've got, the biopic of Stephen Hawking, you've got scientific theories. And the thing that I really noticed about, let's take Bede for instance, and the reason the picture there is a picture of a tide, and there's Bede in his study, is that Bede was the leading scholar across Europe, effectively, Western Europe probably, but possibly wider. And in particular, Bede studied the scriptures, but Bede also, with that same inquisitive mind, took the same inquisitive mind to the tides and studied the tides. In other words, Christians weren't a kind of bastion against learning or against science. Christians were at the forefront of science. Christians were at the forefront of learning. They were curious, they were interested, they were open, they were advanced. And Bede's work on the tides, which no one else had done, saved lives because he produced what was probably the first tide times. So I love this idea of Christians at the forefront of learning because they believe in Christ, the Logos, the Word from whom all wisdom comes. And I hunger after the day, I recognize that it is still the case that Christians are in areas at the forefront of learning, but I hunger for the church to be known as a place that is at the forefront of learning, open, curious, engaged, and contributing to the saving of lives through its love of knowledge, which is intimately connected with its love of the scriptures. That's my point. They're not separate things. For Bede, they were together. His study of the scriptures and his mastery of time were part of the same single tapestry. And so the love of the word inspired them to learn about the world that Christ the Word made. Okay, let's move on. See if we can. The way, obviously, as we've said, the thing about those northern Christians is their leaders and missionaries among them, they were just willing to travel. They were willing to get on the road, and it is something that the Anglican Church does struggle with sometimes. We're very good at stability, but we're not quite so good at mobility. And yet that's where we're seeing some of the life and the energy of God is being willing to travel, being willing to connect in new ways with the culture. There was this great thing where I think was it Augustine's down in Canterbury. This is Augustine of Canterbury, not the theologian, but the missionary. And he writes to Pope Gregory and says they have these things in the they have these pagan areas with these statues. Your Eminence, what should we do? And Pope Gregory writes to him and says, have nothing to do with these pagan statues, destroy the statues, and it needs to be a clean slate. But then Gregory writes again later, says, actually, on second thoughts, maybe leave the statues, maybe work with it. And there's this trying to work out that the willingness to travel is also a missionary willingness to try and work out where are the connection points. What is it? Where do we need to make a clean slate and say, look, this needs to be a fresh thing, there needs to be some difference, and where is it that we can actually engage with the culture where it's at? And as I've said earlier, they were willing to persevere. So there's something so important about that. Let's keep moving, and then we'll be able to take some questions. I've said about the monasteries that they prayed first. I mean, that did strike me, that this practice of going and we're going to start a new monastery. Well, let's not build anything, but we pray and fast for 30 days. So something about praying first is certainly something I always need to learn. Although my one reflection on it is, I just think it's going to sound really bad, you can't beat God at prayer. You could read that several ways. I think it works most ways, actually. But the number of times something good has happened, it's like, I was supposed to pray for that and I forgot, but God gave it to me anyway. So you can't beat God at prayer. Like God knows what we need before we ask. And so you might as well just thank God for the thing he's given you rather than kick yourself for not praying more. But it is a really important lesson, that the priority of prayer. They prayed practically. You may know about this practice of praying in the sea. Now, we don't really do it today. You don't really see it as, if you were interviewing for a position in the church and somebody said, what's described to me your spiritual life? Well, I go into the sea at midnight and pray until 6, stripped down to my swimming costume. You'd probably, have a chat with them about whether they should, reconsider their approach. But in their day, it was something about the physicality of praying. And so it does raise this question, Ignatius' point does, about, how do we physically mark the act of prayer? How do we go on those? We were talking about prayer walking in the New Worshipping Communities group, how important it had been to be prayer walking. And a friend of mine, Christian, who I mentioned earlier, they've done this course at St. Hill called Seedbed for kind of starting new churches, new communities. And he said that this first time they did this session on prayer walking, and they had this person, she was quite a new Christian, and Christian was saying it can be quite important to do prayer walking if you want to do something new. Anyway, come back next week, let's see how it goes. And one of the course members, she came back, she said, well, I needed to do the prayer walking thing. I didn't have anyone to do it with, so I got some of my friends who weren't Christians. I said, right, let's go prayer walking together. So that's what we did. It was great. I thought, that's amazing. That's amazing. She turned it into an invitation, and suddenly people were praying and walking. It's very powerful. And of course, they had that incredible rhythm in the monastic tradition of praying together, having a rhythm, being part of a wider rhythm of prayer. And of course, the whole Lights for Christ prayer, is a great testimony to that. And so I hope you do join the WhatsApp group. All right, we're nearly there. We've got one more, 2 more. The towel. We've got 2 more. So there was this great. What I loved about reflecting on the northern Christians was they were not afraid to ask for healing. Like, they really did pray for healing. You had to, because there was so much sickness and so much death. It would be a failure of compassion not to. And there's a story of I think it's Aidan and Boisel, and they're praying for a brother, and one of them dies and one of them recovers. They just have to live with these ups and downs, but they never stopped praying for healing. But the towel is just the fact that they really changed the culture, not by praying for healing. They really changed the culture by setting up hospitals, by being willing to care for people, by doing the long, patient work of service. And I think that was just really powerful, that they ministered to the world at the point of pain. And that was how they showed their allegiance to Christ. And that was ultimately what made the difference. I got to preach this a year ago at St. George's, Leeds. St. George's, Leeds is right next to the LGI, Leeds General Infirmary in Leeds. You may well know it. It's such a crucial healthcare institution in the north. I was getting ready to preach this. I'm sorry I haven't got the picture here, but you've got you've got, the LGI has these great Victorian red brick kind of pointed roofs, and it's got these lovely kind of arches. I put a picture of that next to Whitby Abbey. It was absolutely clear that it was influenced by the architecture, the arches, the great soaring triangular roofs. There's a serious point here. I mentioned Tom Holland earlier. We only have the exact kind of healthcare system and education system in this country that we have, and across Western Europe, because of the influence of the Christian church. It is true that, you know, there's educational traditions in Islam. I'm sure there are other cultures and traditions that have generated those kinds of things, but nothing in this form like the network of schools and hospitals we have. It was because of that Christian impulse to recognize the image of God in the other and to care and to be present. And that's such an important part of the heritage of Faith in the North. That is part of our story and what we offer again. So the towel is so important. And last of all, and then we could maybe just have a couple of comments and questions before we finish and people come and join us at 3, the table. So we do notice the way that the early Northern Christians, they did find ways to share life together. I mean, the whole development of Lindisfarne was to say, if you want to, when Aidan came across to pick up the pieces after Paulinus had to flee, he knew what to do because he had seen it at Iona. And what he knew to do was to establish a place with tables. And at those tables, people would eat together. And at those tables, people would break bread and wine. And those tables would be the engine of that community life, that eating together, that sharing together, that gathering around the word together. That was how they would drive the re-evangelization of England, and how important the table is. The table there is in the crypt at Ripon Cathedral, where St Wilfrid developed the Christian presence there. And the one other thing that I would, so the Holy Communion, that shared life together, I've put in the middle there, they shared arguments. That's my nice way of alluding to the Synod of Whitby and the tensions between the Roman mission and the Celtic mission. And they had to kind of have a meeting point, was Whitby. But it was always a point of interest and some pride that Hill's role was to host that synod, to host that. It could have been warlike. They could have destroyed each other. And you can debate the merits and demerits of the settlement of Whitby. You can debate whether they could or should have said something different. But what they did do is they gathered around a table to talk. That's part of the physical discipline of being a Christian, is commitment to gather around the table, even when you argue. And maybe that's something that they offer to us today as well. Now, I just wonder if anybody has any quick kind of comments or observations as we finish. We've probably just got a couple of moments if we have the roving mic again, if you want to just make an observation, an addition, any other final comments? Anything anyone wants to share or say? Yes, Amanda.
Thank you. I was reflecting that I felt that there was something about music that was missing for me, and the creativity that goes with music that appears in many of the other aspects, the cross, the creativity on the crosses, the creativity in the way that the word is produced with the beautiful artwork, what Liz was saying about journaling and writing and creativity. It's using the other side of the brain that we often don't use adequately in our spirituality, I think, and there may be something around that.
That is really, really helpful and a point well taken. I think that's right. Anybody else? We'll just take one or two final comments.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've just got one comment from somebody watching online, Amy, who wonders if we can add a body to the 6 icons, using our bodies to praise, dance, cry as we meet with God in worship.
But then it would be 7 icons. But maybe, that's really helpful. Well, we've got people coming to join us now, so we need to stop. But hopefully that is an inspiration. I'm making notes so I can pick that up. Hopefully that is something to chew on and think about. What is it that in your context is the discipling practice, the thing to push against, which is going to help you to grow. So may God bless us as we continue to reflect on these things and the comments and examples that have been shared. And thank you for that time.